Over 50% of TV freelancers in the UK are currently either out of work or struggling financially, and people are leaving the industry in their droves. And while these figures represent the TV industry as a whole in the UK, they're definitely borne out in the wildlife filmmaking industry as well. In this video, I'm going to talk about the state of the natural history wildlife filmmaking industry, how we got here, and my take on what I think it's going to look like in the future. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ben. I'm a natural history cinematographer and filmmaker. While this video will focus on natural history, I think the themes and tones are borne out through TV in the UK and around the world at the moment, and it's undertaking this huge seismic shift in content, media, and the whole TV landscape. Although it's pretty specific to natural history, I think there's a lot of general themes in there as well. So if you're involved in TV and media, I think there'll be something in here that's interesting for you too. With that intro out the way, let's get stuck in. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bit of context. We're going to go back in time a bit, but not too far back, probably about 2018, before the pandemic. And let's set the scene. Netflix are making stuff. Apple have started making things. Disney have started making shows as well. And they're all trying to build up a library of content for themselves. They were getting ready to launch their platforms. Netflix were obviously all up and running, but Apple were getting ready to kick off, as were Disney and Nat Geo. So they were all trying to build their platforms. So one of the big bets that the streamers took was on natural history. Planet Earth had always done really well. Natural history was one of the big moneymakers for the BBC, and so the streamers jumped in with both feet. And if you think about it, it's not that hard to see why. It's got a universal appeal. People love wildlife around the world. It's fairly easy to strip the narration off and change it for a different language. You don't have to redub their words and make sure that the mouths are moving at the same time or anything like that. You just strip it off, put a new narration track on, easy. It's also pretty timeless. It doesn't age in the same way that other things do, because they have references to the world around us, whereas natural history, generally, it's just nature. It has quite a long shelf life, I suppose. So the streamers bet a lot on natural history, really. So that was the start of the natural history bubble. They were all vying to build their catalogues to entice people to come to them, and they thought that having a big natural history library would do that for them, and so they started making things. And they also started making things that would compete with each other. So Netflix and Apple would often make very similar shows at the same time. And I remember working on a night series for Apple at the same time as a night series for Netflix, which I also did one shoot for, was being made. And they're all heavily NDA'd, and there's two teams of people in Bristol doing almost identical shoots who couldn't talk to each other because their paperwork and the shows that they were working on wouldn't allow it. Bristol, from being a very collaborative place, almost overnight became quite a secretive place because of all the NDAs that had been signed and all the things that we weren't allowed to talk about. As it was a bit of a race and a competition, the production schedules shrunk. And even though there was a lot of money being thrown at these projects to get them made, that's not necessarily how wildlife filming works. And you can throw as much money and as many resources at a shoot, but if the animals don't turn up or they don't do what you need them to do in that time period, then it's just not going to work. There were projects that historically would have been 3-year projects that became contracted down and were filmed over the course of 18 months. They were trying to rapidly build up that library of footage, those library of shows, to attract subscribers. And so there wasn't the time that would normally be dedicated by the BBC on something like Planet Earth or one of the other Planet shows, because the production period was contracted, and so there were so many shoots going out, but they weren't necessarily being as successful because the time period allocated for that series to be made in was contracted, and so you got 1.5 seasons, 18 months. You get maybe 2 bites at the cherry. If the first shoot went wrong, you might, if you were lucky, get to go back the second season, but often you'd get one shot at getting a shoot, making it work, and if it didn't work for whatever reason, like floods or drought or fires or anything like that have been happening more recently, if they happened and your behaviour, your sequence, your animals didn't do what was predicted for them to do, then you didn't get to go back, you didn't get to film that behaviour. As a result of that, the shows were sort of less able to take risks and go out on for the new behaviours, the never before filmed bits, because they're risky. If you only have one shot at getting something, it's much better to do something that you know is going to work. And so a lot of these shows didn't take the gambles on the big behaviour, the new sequences, the new behaviour that had never been seen before. They went to places that were predictable, and you knew you were going to get those shots and the sequences that you needed to make the show that they wanted. And because there were competing shows being made for the different channels at the same time, often you would end up with multiple crews filming the same thing. One of my examples of this is I was down in Antarctica. We'd flown to the Falkland Islands, travelled 5 days across Drake's Passage to an island off the coast of Antarctica on the Antarctic Peninsula, and we were joined by another film crew from Bristol who'd also done the same journey, and we were filming the same leopard seal. Not just the same species, at times we were filming the same animal. And it's crazy that you've travelled literally to the end of the world and you're filming the same animal as another film crew for a competing show. So we were filming for Apple and the other film crew were filming for Netflix. That just sort of gives you an example of how much wildlife filming was being done, how in demand the good filming locations were. You would go and you would film in the places that you knew you were going to get something, because there was just so much reliance on getting the shots, getting the sequences, because there was a fairly short deadline on a lot of these shows. And so this is all going on. There's these multiple series all overlapping, big high-end blue chip series, all with similar themes, all being made at once, and there's just so much overlapping. And then COVID hit, and everything just stopped. The brakes went on, we couldn't travel, and so things just paused. But the shows still needed to be made, and so they were just being pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Eventually, when we were allowed to travel again, the floodgates just opened, and there was so many shoots going out because the demand was still there. Those shows needed to be made. It was just busy. It was so busy. Everyone was busy. The natural history industry was bringing people in left, right and centre from everywhere, more APs, more researchers, more camera people. Everyone was being brought in because there was just so much demand. They needed to make this content for the streamers. And then in 2023, the writers' strikes happened in the States, and it shouldn't really affect natural history. I think it just started a snowball. It was around about the time of the Ukraine invasion, so interest rates are going up, gas prices are going up, there's the cost of living crisis in the UK, and also, off the back of COVID, people's viewing habits had changed, and so people were watching much more TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube, and they were watching less TV. There was more churn in how people watched their streaming services as well. And so it just turned into a bit of a perfect storm. Advertising revenues were down for TV advertising. The streamers didn't have as reliable income because there was much more churn in their subscriber bases. And so the brake got slammed on and commissioning stopped. And natural history is a bit insulated from that because the projects are so long. So in the rest of the TV world, it was seen almost immediately. You'd have short projects and then it just dropped off a cliff. Whereas with natural history, because the projects are considerably longer, the commissioning freeze just took longer to hit. And so that wasn't an abrupt cliff, it was more of a gradual decline as people's shows came to an end over a few months to years. And we're sort of seeing that now as the shows that people have been working on are coming to an end and there's nothing there for people to go on to. And that is why there's so much unemployment throughout the industry. I mean, even this week, I think the BBC announced extra redundancies. There were some last year. A lot of production companies have had to downsize because there's not as much for them to make as there previously was, and there's much more competition between all the freelancers that are now available on the market. So it's a really, really weird, tricky time with so many people out of work. Now we get to the exciting bit. What does the future hold? And I suppose this is where I get out my crystal ball and peer into the gloomy depths of the future. And if I'm being honest, I have no idea what's going to happen. But what I do know is that everything has changed. How people watch TV, but actually consume media. As much as I hate that phrase, it's not just TV anymore. It's Netflix, Apple, TikTok, Instagram Reels, it's YouTube. And I watch probably a majority of my YouTube on the TV, and I'm sure probably quite a few of you will be watching on the TV as well. Netflix has stated that its biggest competitor is YouTube, and globally, over 1 billion hours of YouTube is watched on TV every single day. That is mind-blowing. Think about that, 1 billion hours each day, and that's on TV, that's not including computers and phones. So huge shift in how people watch stuff, consume media. Horrible phrase, but that's what is happening. It's not people watching TV anymore, it's people consuming and watching on their phone, watching on TV, but it's not just TV channels. Viewing habits are really changing, and one of the things that's really dipping is TV or linear TV viewing. In the UK and around the world, I think, the viewing figures for linear TV are going down, and also that is correlated to the age of the viewers, which is just going up and up and up. And that's as people watch stuff on their phones, watch streaming services and YouTube and all sorts of things. Attention is being spread far and wide, and so linear TV is really dipping. But in spite of that, I don't think that blue chip is going anywhere. Blue chip wildlife is still one of the highest rated genres on TV, and it does really well, certainly in the UK. And so people still have an appetite for wildlife filmmaking, for nature TV, and for what we do. And that is shown by the high levels of viewership when these things are on TV, in spite of the decreasing numbers. There is still a huge ability for these big landmark series to draw eyeballs. So yeah, it's a weird time, and I think that it's definitely changing a lot. One of the things that I think will happen is that output will decrease. I mean, we can see that by the commissioning freeze. So there aren't as many things being made, and therefore there can't be as many things put out on TV, or certainly not at the rate they were coming out. And I think that what is going to happen is, certainly in the blue chip, in the landmark productions, they are going to slow down how quickly the channels bring shows out and focus on quality. So they're going to take longer to make them, but they're going to set the bar higher, and rather than sort of pushing sausages out, they'll make a quality meal. And so yeah, I think that that's what I see for the blue chip side of things. So there's going to be less stuff made, but what is made is going to be really glossy, really beautiful, and really high end. So another thing that I think is going to happen is there will be more presenter-led stuff, and also more adventurous sort of expedition style filmmaking. And what that does, certainly the adventurous expedition filmmaking, as we evolve into the age of AI, having people there seeing it is much harder to fake that with AI. And so I think that is going to be something that the industry does. One, because it's a bit cheaper to make, although if you're still travelling to Antarctica to do it, it's expensive, but it can be cheaper because you fill airtime up with people. And so presenters and scientists and contributors talking is a cheaper way of filling airtime than having someone sit for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to get a sequence. So I think that is probably going to come as there is less money in the system, but it also does help as AI comes on board. Having people there doing it in person gives a veracity to it that I think is something that's we're going to have a challenge that we're going to come across. And I'm going to talk about AI in another video coming up fairly soon. I've been thinking a lot about that. One of the big problems with natural history, and one that's sort of come off the back of this big gamble that the streamers went on, other content has really won out because it's bingeable, and the streamers really want to keep people on their platforms. And so if you're a streamer, you want a program that will keep people watching for hours and hours and hours, and they'll be able to binge it. And natural history content isn't very bingeable. It's fairly easy to switch off at the end of an episode. And so I think that, I know that there are production companies working on this problem to try and incorporate cliffhangers and build stories through multiple episodes. But I think that it's tricky. It's tricky with natural history, and it works much better in dramas, even in documentaries with people in them, because there is a way to build tension and build intrigue that is considerably harder to do with wildlife and natural history. So that's a challenge that people are looking to bridge, because natural history tends to be sort of short sequences stitched together. A lot of these sequences stand really well on their own, so are sort of short form content and work really well on the other platforms that are a much shorter form, because those individual sequences are very able to hold someone's attention. So as storytellers, natural history are really good at short form storytelling, because we make sequences. We were doing YouTube and TikTok and Reels before they were even a thing, because we make these little vignettes, these stories that are fairly short and do really well, but then they're tied together across an episode. So I think we already have quite a strong base to transition onto some of the short form storytelling platforms. And in terms of jobs, it's not massively rosy at the moment, but there are definite green shoots coming along. Last year, in 2024, there was the saying, survive till 2025. And some people are saying thrive in 2025, but I'm not really feeling that. There's definitely a few more productions coming online, and it is looking brighter for me. Certainly, I've done more work this year than I did last year, and I think that there's more stuff in my calendar, but it's certainly not back up to the levels it was before, and there's not a huge number of things that have been commissioned in production. I was at Wildscreen last year, and it felt pretty depressing, if I'm being honest. There were a lot of people there, a lot of people who hadn't done very much work that year. There was a lot of series producers and execs, people who ran production companies who were looking for commissions, and there were commissioners with no money in their pockets to be able to commission that much stuff. And there were a lot of people really who hadn't worked for a long time feeling a bit upset about the whole situation. Felt a bit like the death of the industry, but I came away feeling quite hopeful, actually, because rather than the death of wildlife TV, I see it quite differently. I see it more as a metamorphosis, and for a long time I think wildlife TV has been the very hungry caterpillar. We've been just doing the same thing, munching, and making lots and lots of stuff. And we're in a transitionary phase. We're in a chrysalis at the moment. We're going into metamorphosis, and this is the industry changing, going through a massive change, I think, at the moment. How things work, how TV works is just going through a massive shift. I think out of this chrysalis, a really beautiful butterfly is going to emerge, and I'm really hopeful about the future of wildlife filmmaking. I think that we're at the beginning of a slow decline certainly of linear TV, and also possibly streaming. Netflix have just had really good results, but the streamers are also competing with the social media platforms. So it's a big fight at the moment, but I think that the future for natural history, for wildlife filmmaking is really bright, and we are going to be that beautiful butterfly. For so long, it's been a really tricky industry to get into. It's been very close-knit, quite a small industry, and also very Bristol-centric, and reliant on really expensive kits. And now, you don't need expensive kit. If you've got a couple of $1,000s, a couple of £1,000, you can buy a camera, a lens and a tripod. You can go out and make a film. You now have in your pocket the means to distribute that film, and so you don't need to be in Bristol. I think that is a really huge step, because it opens it up from quite a niche thing that only a few people in the entire world did. Now that the doors have been blown off and anyone can get stuck in, it can't not be more diverse. It is just going to be more people telling more diverse stories about more interesting animals and from more interesting perspectives. So the more people telling stories around the world, the more interesting stories that are told. So I'm really, really excited about that. COVID showed that it was important that people from outside the UK made these films. It was a necessity because people from the UK couldn't get out around the world. And so the wildlife filmmaking industry in the UK discovered a load of really talented people around the world. And then everything's sort of crunched back down again, and that network of people around the world still exists, and there's so many stories to tell, and it's never been more important to tell those stories. And so I think that there are a lot of opportunities, And a lot of people have realised that this genre is open to them, and also it's really, really important to tell these stories. It's never been more important. You've got the biodiversity crisis, you've got the climate crisis, and the ability to tell the stories of the animals, even just to document species before they go extinct, but also to engage local people, to connect with their local creatures, their local habitats, their local ecosystems, and to protect those. That is how we as wildlife filmmakers, as wildlife storytellers, are going to protect this place, the world, and protect what we love. And so I don't think that blue chip landmark films like Planet Earth and Blue Planet, they can have a role and can have an impact, but they will never have enough impact to make as much of a difference around the world as we as wildlife filmmakers can by working on a much more diverse set of projects. And so that is why I'm really, really excited. It's never been cheaper to make films. It's never been more accessible. It's never been easier to distribute them. And it's an age of storytelling and an age of video. And as filmmakers, we're really well set to tell really important stories and share them with the world. And so it's a really, really cool time to be a wildlife filmmaker. In terms of making money from it, this is where it gets trickier. Previously, there was one main pathway, and that was the money comes from the commissioner to the production company. The production company employs staff, and it employs freelancers, and it pays them, and they get paid. And it was simple. It was easy. It wasn't easy to get those jobs, but that pathway was a very straightforward pathway. Now, that pathway's sort of broken, and so if you're a wildlife filmmaker and you want to make money, you have to find a different pathway. But there are loads and loads of different places that need wildlife content, that need wildlife films, and so I think that you just have to look a little bit harder for that pot of money, and usually it's directly with someone. So whether that's working with an NGO or a production company, or making yourself and then self-distributing it and making money through the social media channels as an influencer, there are ways of making money. And there's actually quite a few companies now, brands, that have green and impact-based strategies as part of their brand identity. And I mean, the obvious main one is Patagonia. They make films about things that are important to them and the environments that they as a brand exist within. And they've made films about dams and salmon fishing and many other things. And they are an impact-driven company. And it's not just them, there are many, many other companies that need stories telling about nature and the natural world and wildlife. And so if you can find a company like that, then that is a really interesting, different way of funding the stories that we need to tell. And also, sometimes you just need to go out and film it yourself and do it because it's important, not necessarily because it's going to fill your pocket with money. I think it's going to be much more important for wildlife filmmakers to have a diversified income stream and not just rely on making specific wildlife films or wildlife films for TV. Over the last year, I've developed a few different income streams on top of wildlife TV, and I mean, some of that is teaching. I've got some other filming work around the wildlife side of things. I've done some work filming for a local wildlife charity, and there's a couple of other interesting projects that I'm sure you'll see on this channel sometime soon. They're not quite ready yet, but they're in development. So yeah, there's multiple income streams coming together, and as much as I'd love to just be doing wildlife TV work, at the moment I'm concentrating on building out that diversified income, because I've just seen how it can just swap like that, and it's never sensible, especially as a freelancer, to just rely on one thing. It's not easy, because you have to be more involved and have multiple hats rather than just go on shoots and just do your job. You have to be pulling multiple strings, and that's something that has taken me a while to get my head around, but I think I'm starting to get there with it. So I've just talked for quite a long time. I'd be interested to hear what you think. I'm quite hopeful about the industry, and as I've said, I think that we're in this metamorphosis period. A beautiful butterfly is about to emerge, but I might be wrong. So do you think that the industry is just about to die and this is the end of wildlife TV, or do you think this is the beginning of a new beautiful period of making wildlife films? Let me know down below. And also, if you've been affected by this, then say something down below. It's very, very easy, especially as freelancers, to feel quite alone and quite on your own when you're not working, because my interaction with other people is while I'm at work generally. Let me know how you're feeling and if you're hopeful about things. And finally, click on one of these videos if you want to see what I've been up to recently. Go on, click it.